make sure that I'm writing this correctly. That's it. Dabar, or Diber actually, would be how it looks in the Targum. And it means word. And so the thought is that, yeah, there might be a Jewish Greek connection here, but the place to see the connection is not, John's Gospel immediately, but probably the reason why John's Gospel is doing this connection between God and Word has a lot to do with the example that was established in first century Judaism and you had Jewish writers using this word as a circumlocution or as a euphemism for referring to Yahweh. So remember a couple weeks ago, we were trying to talk about how whenever you see capital L, small capital O, small capital R, small capital D in English Hebrew, in English Old Testament, the word that translates is Yahweh. Well, so instead of using Lord as a euphemism for Yahweh, the Targums tend to use word or diber as a euphemism for Yahweh. And so this becomes a way to sort of see this very close connection between the Word and God that both Jews would have found really immediate and accessible, but also because the Targums are in some sense a response to this interaction between Jews and Gentiles in the first century. The Greeks and Romans would have found this pretty intelligent, as well. So what you have is, to sort of take all this big block of information and make it simple, is a kind of very, very interesting cross-cultural communication going on here. A Christian making use of a Jewish and somewhat Greek concept to articulate an idea of who Jesus is. So that's sort of the background to how you get this hymn out there. And I gave you in just whatever, 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of what I have. Literally took me 2 some odd years of really deep reading in this labyrinthine discussion among New Testament scholars to kind of get an idea of where this stuff is kind of rooted. And it's one of those discussions that is rabbit trails upon rabbit trails upon rabbit trails. But that's kind of been the fruit of that rabbit trail. That's nothing original with me, but I'm really dependent on a guy that actually graduated from the same college that I graduated from a million years ago, a famous New Testament scholar named Craig Keener, gave me the basic building blocks that suddenly made sense of some of this stuff. But, anyway, question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we went through a Bible class on Romans, and it's really easy reading most of the way through, but there's 3 or 4 chapters on salvation history where the Jews start out as people who are giving us the Messiah, but they reject the Messiah. So then they fight over whether or not the Gentiles have to become Jews before they become Christians, and it's back and forth. And at first, the Jews help the Gentiles find Jesus, and then the Gentiles help the Jews find Jesus. And that's what I thought of when you talked about this cross-cultural exchange. It's fascinating.
Well, one of the there's a very, very famous scholar of missions by the name of Arthur Wallace, and basically his idea is that in the church's mission from, going back all the way, when I talk about church, I mean the big concept of the people of God going back all the way into the Old Testament. That every time you have a translation of the message of Christ, what he says is a wonderful little way, turn a phrase, a way that he expresses himself. He says that each time Jesus gets bigger. And the reason why is in the process of evangelizing, in the process of making Jesus known cross-culturally, you begin to find connections between the gospel and the receptor culture, whoever's being evangelized at the time, so that you see how human beings and human cultures are in some ways kind of just built for the reception of the gospel. So that every time you have one of these little missionary links that pull people together and inaugurate and induct people into the experience of Jesus in the Christian faith, that our sophistication and our understanding of God enhances. And it's one of the ways that the Spirit leads us into all truth. And this is exactly one of those kinds of things that the book of Galatians says that in the fullness of time, Jesus was born. And it's almost like all of human history sort of waiting for the unique sets of circumstances, that took place in the first century and to happen. The political events, the preparation of the people of God, the return from exile, sort of sets the perfect stage into which the Son of God becomes incarnate. And every year you have a direct experience of this. When the announcement of Christmas at the Christmas Vigil Mass, usually you'll have a deacon or a priest will cant the Roman martyrology that goes back, and goes back through time, and all these periods of time from the beginning of the earth and from the flood, and then that once Christ became incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and this is the nativity of Jesus Christ. It's sort of a dramatic portrayal of that very truth. Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this, because you talk about it, but it's better to actually engage it. Somebody that feels led of God and feels like they've got some confidence in reading, jump in and read our first 9 verses here. You do a good job, so jump in. All right, you're our class's official lector.
First, the whole.
Yeah.
In the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and without Him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in Him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world.
Okay. Now, what you have here is in some sense a re-singing, a re-dramatization, a re-poetizing of what Genesis chapter 1 has said all along. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was out without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Well, that poetic song of Genesis 1 gets sort of re-sung. But right in the middle of the song, you get this plop down, this idea of the Word, who was there in the beginning, who was with God and who was God. And so you have not only, Genesis 1 sort of should be echoing around in your head, but remember what we did last week with Proverbs. Doesn't this sound like, wisdom, talking about being with God and present with God? And so there are connections, interestingly, in that venue as well. But what you have, and you get down, he was in the beginning with God, all things came into being through him, without him not one thing came into being. What is coming to be, this is very much echoes of that language there in Proverbs as well as in Genesis 1. And then what happens, and I always wish that the New Testament translators would do this, this right here beginning at verse 6 should be kind of a parenthesis. Because the poetry kind of ends. And then it just kind of goes into straight prose. I mean, it's almost as though he stops the song, wait a minute, and then goes into some narrative. Once upon a time, there was a man who was sent from God named John. He was a witness to testify to the light so that all might come to believe in him. John was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. Back to the song. And so you get these references to John that sort of jog that first 18 verses. But then so you see the connections between the poetry, between these big poetic themes, and the actual life that John's gospel is starting to narrate. So you have John coming onto the scene. John says, "Don't follow me." But then something that would have been just as offensive to the Jews as it would have been to the Gentiles gets dropped on the ground, right in front of everybody, and nobody knows kind of what to do with this. And it's this. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. A little bit above this, in the prologue, it says that the Word, the Logos, or the Diber, became incarnate. And this is going to be one of those important words, not only for when we pray the Creed on Sunday mornings, but this idea of God becoming incarnate is a central concept to the Christian faith. It's the scandal that nobody has a problem with God creating and God being eternal and God being present with wisdom is a sort of highfalutin concept. But when you start to talk about God becoming a dude, all of a sudden, you can hear the record needle scraping across the record that everybody is spitting out water. What? And so we talk about the incarnation, and this will be a much bigger concept in a couple weeks. But a good way to sort of understand incarnation, I use this all the time because it makes it really, really robust. Does anybody know what chili con carne is? What's chili con carne?
With beans.
Yeah, no, it's with meat. Chili with meat. So the incarnation, you hear carne, right there, carnivore. It is God with meat. And nobody. God in the flesh. And nobody has a problem with the invisible God making stuff, or the eternal God doing abstract things, or the wisdom of God, or the Word of God as sort of these esoteric concepts. But the notion that God has bad breath and body odor, seriously, I mean, not to be like crude for the sake of being crude, but you brought up beans. The idea that God, a very God, can pass gas.